everyone. Is it started?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Code Together. Samina and I are excited to present to everyone today. We are hoping this class provides a chance for interaction as well as some insight into some coding challenges. Some of you may have already taken a version of this class that was pioneered by our colleagues Jane Knight and Carol Ann Wilson. They started this class, I want to say about maybe 6 months ago, and they started it in European time, and then it was so popular, it rolled over and started coming into US time and other time zones, and now it's offered in multiple languages as well. So we're very excited to be able to bring this in an Eastern time zone today and share our coding knowledge with you all. This class will run approximately 90 minutes. I will be going through how to interact via the polls. However, we also encourage everyone to submit questions and comments via the chat. You can find the chat functionality on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You should see it where you logged in to GoToWebinar. You should see an option to pose a question to us or a comment via a questions panel or chat panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so now we will move on to meet us today. So my name is Nicole Fornerato, and I'm a clinical associate with the MSSO. I'm based in Northern New Jersey and the New York City metropolitan area. I joined the MSSO back in March of this year, so 2020. And prior to that, I worked in the pharma biotech industry my entire career, mainly in medical coding, but also beyond medical coding in both clinical and safety or post-marketing side of things. Now I would like to introduce my partner for today's class, Samina. Samina.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Code Together. My name is Samina Qureshi, and I'm a medical officer based on the East Coast of the United States in the state of Maryland. I am primarily working in the terminology maintenance team at the MSSO, and I look forward, along with my colleague Nicole, to discussing some of these examples today.
Thank you, Samina. I would also like to introduce our behind-the-scenes person today, Hannah Eaton. She's helping us with ensuring everything goes smoothly. Hopefully we have no technical hiccups. If we do, she can help us out with that. So we want to thank her for all her hard work behind the scenes and ensuring that we can pull this off today with no issues, hopefully. Okay, so we also wanted to let you know that this is something a little bit different that started in September of 2021. Since now we have very little time, very little face-to-face training due to COVID and the pandemic, there is an increasing demand for certification. So in response to users' requests, we at the MSSO decided to provide webinar attendance certificates. And like I said, this started on September 1st. So for any class or webinar that you attend from September 1st through current, you will be receiving a certification for that. The only thing you will not be receiving a certification for is online user group meetings. If you attend face-to-face training, if you're lucky enough to have face-to-face in your location, or if you attend a future face-to-face training, the certificates will still be provided via the self-service application. The long-term plan is that all certificates, even the ones you will receive after the webinar, will be provided in the self-service application. And like I mentioned, no certificates for webinars will be provided prior to September 1st. So if you attended a webinar at the end of August, unfortunately, you will not be able to receive your certificate. And they will be sent within 3 working days after this webinar concludes. Okay, so now we're on to a little more of a general slide that we like to start off our presentations with. Our classes. So before we begin today's class, I would like to tell you a little bit about MEDRA and the ICH. So that's the International Council for Harmonization. All activities for the MSSO are overseen by the ICH MEDRA Management Committee, which is composed of the ICH parties, the MHRA, which is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency of the UK, Health Canada, and WHO acts as an observer. Now we always kind of add this slide. It's a general slide to let you know about the copyright notice. So if you decide to use some of this information for today's presentation, please just acknowledge the ICH and that the original information was modified. So feel free to use it just as long as you mention that it was modified and at the ICH. So we will not be sending out slides upon the conclusion of this webinar, but as Hannah mentioned at the start of the webinar, this presentation will be made available on our YouTube channel. Information regarding how to access this presentation, including the links, will be provided at the end of the presentation. So we will have it available for you to be able to see. Okay, so unfortunately, as we all know and are aware, we are still via webinar and not face-to-face today. Hopefully soon we can all be face-to-face again and holding this class in person, which would be nice. Hopefully maybe in 2022, we'll see. Even though we are all virtual, we will have a lot of active audience participation. So there are several ways to participate today. As mentioned, you can use through our live, we're going to have live polls that will be available. Information on how to log into those live polls I'll be providing in a moment. You can also, as I mentioned, use the comments panel to ask a question or to provide a comment, or if you want to, challenge anything we're saying or anything you would like, you can type into that questions panel and we will see it. And Samina and I will be monitoring it throughout the class. So we'll take pauses to make sure that we're using what's being said in as real time as we can to help, with the interaction during today's class. It's always important to note that in the interest of time, there may be times where we will have to agree to disagree, and that's okay. Sometimes just something's very ambiguous and we just have to agree to disagree on it, on the coding of a term. And it also, has to do with sometimes some organizations handle things slightly different than other organizations. And it doesn't mean necessarily that it's wrong. It just means it's handled in a slightly different way. So we'll see as we go through if we encounter any of those examples. And unfortunately, during this class, we cannot take specific coding requests. However, there will be a chance at the end where you can let us know what you would like for future classes. So you'll be able to provide examples if you want if your organization has a point that's like a little bit of more concern and there's some big discussions around it, you can let us know and we'll work it into a future class so that we talk about it. Yep, so we'll be taking those, as I mentioned, after class. Now, how do we get involved today? So you can use this link. I believe Hannah also provided it before the start of the class. So you can log into www.polev.com/Nicole and my first initial of my last name, F. So you can log in this way. And please note that there is no need to enter a username. I also wanted to note that all activities are anonymous. So whatever your response is, or if you change your response, we won't know who you are or who's responding, and it will not be recorded. It will be completely anonymous. So feel free to chat with us. Here's also a new current way to join the poll everywhere, an easier way, I feel, to participate. So you could just scan this QR code. I know we're, during the pandemic and COVID, we've all been seeing a lot of these QR codes lately. They do simplify things tremendously. So how this works, if you're not familiar with it, is you can put your cell phone up to the QR code that's on your screen right now, and a box should pop up, and you could click on that link, and then we'll give you a minute to do this to get everybody logged into the poll so we can have interaction. And then once that link pops up on your cell phone, you can hit dismiss and then skip. As we mentioned, you don't have to put a username in, and we will be keeping these anonymous, so you don't have to type your name or anything. And then as soon as I advance the slide, you should be able to see the first poll. Oh, I see people are already dropping their pins, so that's good. So it's working. So we'll give you a little bit of time for everyone to pop in the poll. So Samina, see, we have a lot of participation, looks like from all over the globe.
Yes, we have someone in India as well as Europe and all across the globe.
Yes, Canada, a lot on the East Coast, which makes sense. Yeah, we'll give another couple seconds for everyone to let us know where you are.
There's a pin in the water. That's quite a bit of dedication, or maybe their pin is not quite on land yet.
Well, hopefully someone's on a beautiful yacht somewhere enjoying their life while they're taking this class today. That would be amazing. Lots and lots, heavy East Coast, which we expected. So it's nice to see that we have a lot of European, it looks like, and as you mentioned, India as well. So pins are still dropping. It's good. We're getting some Midwest too.
Yeah, surprisingly, I don't see anyone from the West Coast yet.
Yeah. Hannah could drop her little pin in there. So, okay, we'll give another couple of seconds for everyone. Okay. All right, now we'll move on to the next poll. Okay, so we would like to know, gather some demographics around the role each of you play. So the poll is open if everyone wants to start to answer. Hopefully there's no issue. It's always helpful for us to track, to understand, our audience. So, give it a couple minutes. Yeah, we like to know what roles, because we understand that when coding, there are times when, maybe different depending on what role you're in and how you actually use Medra. Oh, I see we have a lot of statisticians. That's good. Academia. Okay.
We have very few IT professionals, as I can see, but still, that's good.
Yeah, we still have a couple, so that's good. Switching.
Maybe some people aren't really sure what their role is, so they're switching.
Or maybe people also, I can vouch for this from past experience. Maybe people play dual roles, so they may be involved in a lot of, have their hands in a couple different pots. So, okay, very nice. It's good to know. So it's good to see that we have a lot of scientific research in academia and regulatory authority. All right, I'm going to move on. In the interest of time, we'll move to the next poll. Thank you, everyone. It's interesting though, here the medical coding's down towards the bottom, a medical coder itself. So, okay, so now we would like to move on to our last poll. So our last introductory poll anyway, just on demographics, get to know everyone. What is your experience with Medra? Okay, so it looks like we have people right in the middle, 2 to 4 years, a little bit of everything. So it's good to know. So thank you all for participating in these introductory polls. It's good to see that the poll everywhere is working fine, it seems. All right, and now we'll start, we'll move along to the Medra browsers. So in order, today, the use of our Medra browsers will be important to actively participate during our examples. So in order to participate, it would be nice for you to be able to browse yourself so you can comment or provide feedback to us as well. So we want to let you know there are 3 ways available to browse Medra during today's presentation. You can use your desktop browser if you previously downloaded it onto your PC. So I know some companies have allowed a Medra desktop browser while others prefer everyone use the web-based. So if you have the Medra desktop, you can use it. Or you can join via the web-based browser using the link provided. So tools.medra.org/WBB/. I will be providing login information shortly. You can use that now if you have your company, your organization's login and password. You can go to that. Or if you prefer, you can use your mobile browser. If you like to, you want to stick to your cell phone, since we're doing polls on the cell phone, you could pull the browser up on your cell phone and browse there. And the link is also provided. So it's mmb.medra.org. Okay, and as I mentioned, you can use the web-based browser. It does require your company's login and password. However, if you don't have that available, or you don't know what it is, or you don't even know where to find it, we are granting temporary access to the web-based browser for demonstration purposes for today's webinar. So you can go to the link I provided on the previous screen, and you could type in the username training and the password that's on the screen in order to gain access. So I'll give everyone a moment get your browsers up and running, get everything ready so that we're all on the same page. Okay, so why are the browsers so important? So using a browser during today's class will not only allow us to actively have active participation from you, but it will also allow you to follow along and try your own searches to see what you can come up with. Maybe you can even find something better than myself or Samina finds. We'll see how it goes. So for all the browsers, the MSSO offers, like I mentioned, a Medra ID and password are required. That's why we granted temporary access today for those of you who may not know your ID and password. But using a browser allows you to be able to view, search the entire Medra hierarchy, as well as all SNQs. So it really is a valuable tool to have on hand when you're doing your day-to-day coding, or even when you're doing your analysis of data. You could save your searches, so in a research bin, and then export them for later use, which is always helpful, because if you're searching a bunch of different things at once, especially from the analysis side, you could save it and export it. And more information around our browsers is provided in additional training classes the MSSO offers. So information and website and how to sign up will be provided towards the end of the class. Since today we're not necessarily focusing on our tools in our browser. I mean, it's great. They're extremely handy and great to have, but we won't be going into detail on how to search via the browser. We'll just be using it for our coding purposes today. Okay, so now as everyone that deals with medical coding or is actual medical coder themselves know, there are certain challenges that exist when medical coding. So we can, when referencing medical coding, it's important to remember that, yeah, there can be some challenges. An exact LLT isn't always available. So, you may come close to what you have as a reported term, but an exact match may not be available. There may be more than one approach on how to code something. Some terms can be ambiguous. So the way an individual interprets data, the way we all interpret data can be very different. It can vary. So assumptions around a term should be avoided when possible. I mean, typically, not even when possible, just at all times if you can avoid assumptions. Code as reported verbatim terms come in. It should be based off of what is reported and what is available in the reported term. A perfect example of this is this picture, so about ambiguity. So when Samina actually found this picture and she sent it to me and she said, hey, we can use this for a presentation today. And I was like, oh, that's great. And I looked at it and I didn't know what I was looking at, to be completely honest. I thought it was rocks and like some water at first. And then I started looking a little bit more and I noticed that I saw two ducks with their beaks facing towards the left. And I was like, oh, see, it just took me a minute. I needed to let it set in and think about it. And then I was able to see something a little bit more clear. Now I know when I spoke to Samina about it, and Samina, you can let us know, she saw something completely different, right?
I don't know where you're seeing the ducks, Nicole. I see 2 rabbits.
And I don't know what everyone else sees, but it was a little bit more difficult for me to see the rabbits. But Samina, right, when you first looked, that's the first thing you saw, right?
Yeah, so based on where your eyes focus on or which aspect of the picture you look on, you can either focus on the pointy objects, and which led Nicole to believe there are 2 duck bills, 2 ducks looking to the left. Or if you were like me, I focused on the white spot towards the right of the circle, and that looks like 2 bunny heads looking to the right with their ears pointing to the left. So definitely this highlights the fact that you can interpret things differently depending on where you focus on, what your perspective is.
Exactly. And not only do you might see things totally different, but even when I first looked, I didn't see either one of those things. And it's not that anything is necessarily right or wrong. It's just the way our brains operate and how we interpret things. So yeah, it was a great slide, and it was provided a little fun, especially since at first I saw rocks. I have no idea where I got that from.
Nicole, you're a duck person or a rock person, and I'm a rabbit person.
Yeah, I'm probably more of a rock. No, no, the ducks are clear now. So, all right, Samina, before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to take a pause and just see if there are any questions or anything that we need to address before we move on to the next slide.
I think the only question we've had thus far is a little difficulty in logging into the poll, but we've then posted the how to do that with the instructions, the site, the link, as well as the password for the online Medra browser.
Okay, great. And then I see somebody needs the password, so I'll just go back to the password slide. There we go. I'll give another couple seconds, and then we'll move forward with the next slide. So give everyone a second to make sure that everyone has that password. You can even, if you're using your phone, you could take a picture of it as well. Might be easier, and then you can use it on your own time. Okay, let me get back to where we were. Okay, Samina, so now I'll pass it along to you.
Sure, thank you, Nicole. Okay, so here, moving on the theme of various ways one can interpret different things. Here we have a little funny cartoon, the gentleman saying, "Call me a taxi, please." Now, for those of us who are not, or those of you who are not native English speakers, as well as those who are native speakers, you can interpret this differently. So the young lady is saying, well, do you want me to get you a taxi, or do you want me to call you taxi from now on? So it is a little humorous, but the point we're trying to bring home here today is that typically if you take it into context, what the gentleman probably means is he wants her to hail her a cab or get him a taxi vehicle in order for him to have a ride. So just another example of how you can interpret things differently when you see certain verbatim strings or certain terms. And we're going to see plenty of examples like that in our examples today. Okay, so let's moving on along to the next slide. Let's see. Okay, so a little bit, we would like to talk about medical judgment. When you approach any verbatim string or a coding example, it's very important to have a nuanced approach or keep a balance between the coding rules you have in your organization in order to maintain consistency, as well as utilizing at the same time your medical judgment to make sure you capture correctly and accurately the adverse event that's presented to you. And this is all done in order to ensure that you're managing risks to patients appropriately by capturing the correct code. Now, something we'll illustrate definitely throughout today's session is the use of medical references. It's very important because we're not all experts in all therapeutic areas, and as well, you know that medical science is an ever-evolving field. So it's always a good idea to check your medical references if you're not sure or not certain on the latest research or maybe the latest nuances around a particular concept. The third point I'd like to bring home is it's sometimes necessary. You may see various terms in your verbatim string or the concept that's being described that is not adequately present in Medra as it stands today. There's no adequate synonym or term in Medra in order to capture the term you're trying to sort of identify. So in that scenario, which is somewhat rare, what you would do is request a change request or request a new term to be added to Medra. And you would use the WebCR tool that we have in order to submit that change request. And later on in the slides, towards the end, we'll give you the link on how to access the WebCR tool. Okay, now a little bit about internal conventions. As we code, as you know, you may have firsthand experience. Various organizations have different members on the coding team, which have varying levels of expertise or experience. Therefore, it's very important to have a consistent way that everyone handles the data, as well as everyone codes appropriately and consistently. And of course, your internal coding conventions should be generic enough that they can be applied across all therapeutic areas. And the main purpose and focus of internal coding conventions is to help alleviate ambiguity with terms or how to approach various challenging scenarios. Now, there's different types of internal conventions that organizations may have. Some conventions may address various principles of case management or case processing. On the other hand, you can also have internal conventions that address various clinical data management aspects. For the purpose of today's presentation and what's applicable or relevant to us is having good internal coding conventions that tell you how to address and approach various principles in coding. Now, it's very important, I'd like to mention here, that it's a good idea to keep your internal coding conventions updated and to sort of look at them with each version release, because with each new Medra version release, there are new terms which may offer better solutions than what you may have memorialized in your coding conventions. So with these aspects in mind, making sure you have a balanced approach, that you weigh the consistency versus the medical judgment, as well as making sure to follow what your internal coding conventions say, let's move on and start with coding together. So I'm sure everyone now is familiar with the various Medra browser logins that Nicole has provided. So you have access to log in and perform these exercises with me, as well as you know how to log into POLEV when I ask you at various parts of the exercise to give me your responses. Okay, let's go to the first example. Okay, so here's the first example that I'd like everyone to work on today. She had back pain around start of her periods. So this is all we got in our report. She had back pain around the start of her periods. So first of all, the wheels in motion start in my mind, and I think, well, is this verbatim clear enough to code? That's the first question I ask myself. Very rarely or sometimes there'll be instances in which the verbatim that you get is just very ambiguous and you can't make heads or tail about it. And in those scenarios, you may sometimes need to have a query or send a query to the site or the person who sent you the verbatim. Now here, if you're not a native English speaker, or even if you are, you may or you may not be familiar. What is a period? What can a period mean? For the most part, in context, we know from our medical knowledge that period often is the layman term or another way of saying menstruation or the menstrual cycle. So in addition, we also think what sock or what organ system or what anatomical part of the body am I going to focus on? It gets me thinking of where I'm going to look in Medra for my term. And then, of course, once I am sort of situated, then I look at what is the most appropriate or the most granular or specific term that's going to capture adequately what's been reported. And then sometimes some verbatim terms or strings of verbatim have multiple elements to them in which just one code is not adequate to capture the entire scenario. So in those instances, sometimes you need to split and have more than one code in order to adequately represent what's reported in your verbatim string. So let's go back to our particular example right now. She had back pain around start of her period. Okay. Okay, so let's log in. You can look or at least get ready to log into your browser. Okay, before we do that, before we go to the browser, I want to look at my reference slide, which I wanted to check on and see what exactly is menstruation. So if we minimize the browser for now. Okay. I'm going to go to the next slide and see what period means. Okay, there we go. All right, so when I looked up at a reference in order just to make sure, just to sort of confirm what my understanding is of the word period, I see from this very good reference article that I pulled up, menstruation is a woman's monthly bleeding, often called your period. So there you go. It has been established that I am correct that the layman term is often synonymous. The period word is also synonymous with menstruation. Okay, so let's go into our browser now. You can use the QR code. Okay, so now when I look in the browser, I'm going to look up the main thing that was in my verbatim string about back pain. Okay, let's see. Okay, so back pain. When I look up back pain, because that's what, first half of my verbatim string says, I see that I pull up several hits. One is an exact match back pain, and if I look at the PT, it goes to back pain. If I further look at the hierarchy, I see the HLTs, musculoskeletal and connective tissue. So it's always important, as I will illustrate in future examples in this presentation, it's always a good idea to get a good understanding of where your LLT resides, which PT it resides in, and further where in the hierarchy that PT is, which HLT it's linked to. This will give you clues that you are arriving at the correct code to what your verbatim is saying. Now, in addition to the exact match of back pain, I see several other examples. I see acute back pain, I see back pain without radiation, I see chronic back pain, and as I open them to see what PT they reside in, I see it's the same PT back pain. Muscular back pain is the PT back pain. Pain over the back. Another interesting term, premenstrual back pain. When I open that PT in order to see what hierarchy it says, I see that it has a different hierarchy from the plain term back pain. The premenstrual pain or the premenstrual back pain LLT rolls into the PT of premenstrual pain, which in itself has different HLT links than the back pain PT. It has the HLT of menstruation and uterine bleeding, as well as the HLT of pain and discomfort. So as you can see, if I were to code this, you choose this as the code, I have two different SOCs representing this term, primary SOC being reproductive system, whereas the plain LLT back pain PT goes to only one SOC, which is musculoskeletal and connective tissue disorders. So with that knowledge in mind, after I've checked my browser for all the choices that I have to choose from, let's see what you as the audience would choose. So let's minimize the browser. Everyone's using this QR code to log into Poll Everywhere if you haven't done so already. And let's see what our next slide has the choices of the poll. Okay, so here's the poll. So I'd like you now to make a choice of what you would pick. Now that I've looked at the browsers, looked at all my options, looked at the hierarchy of each of the PTs, and my verbatim was she had back pain around start of her periods, what would you choose? Okay, so I see that the majority of you, or 87, 86% of you, would choose choice C, premenstrual back pain. And evenly divided are, some people would say none of the above. And then we're equally divided in the choices of back pain, low back pain, or just premenstrual pain. Okay, so let's go to our learning slide with the correct choice. Or before I tell you the correct choice, I want to tell you that make sure you check the meaning of the terms using Medra, right? So we did that. We looked in the browser. We looked at the various choices of plain back pain versus premenstrual back pain. We checked, made sure, and established that period does refer to menstruation. So that was done with the use of our reference. And then our most exact match was premenstrual back pain. And we want to capture, for those of you who just chose back pain, that's partially correct. Because yes, if you look at the verbatim string, it does say she had back pain, but it also told you and qualified that with around the start of her periods. So it was premenstrual back pain. So those of you who chose, or the majority of you who chose choice C, premenstrual back pain, were correct. And this is the answer slide. So all of you who chose premenstrual back pain, give yourself a big pat on the back. That was the correct choice, because this term is the one that most adequately represents all of the information that was in our verbatim string. So do we have any questions on this particular example?
No questions so far that I see.
Excellent.
So
good.
I guess you were very clear in your description, so that's great.
Good. So I think, and Nicole, we don't need to do any others. Everyone's an excellent. Everyone's got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. We do have more challenging ones as we go. So let's go to the next example. Okay. So this is our example number 2. allergy to COVID-19 vaccine. Again, the same thought process should go through my mind. Let's see, is this verbatim clear enough? What exactly is it telling me? What is being reported? So some sort of allergy is reported, definitely. That's the first word in the verbatim string, allergy. But then the remaining verbatim string tells me it's an allergy to the COVID-19 vaccine. So this sort of drives me to which SOC or which anatomical area in MEDRA I'm going to look. Definitely allergy, but I have to keep in mind they're telling me specifically it's to the vaccine. And then I'm going to think I have to choose the most appropriate LLT. And then again, if this is a multi-element or multi-concept verbatim, I may need to choose more than one term. Okay, so let's go to our browser. And we're going to look in their browser. So it did say allergy to COVID-19 vaccine. So let me see what in the browser. Let's see. If I search COVID-19 vaccine, what do I get? Let me just do COVID-19 allergy, partial of both. See, and as I want to illustrate here, you may not always get any match, or you may not always get the exact match. So you have to search around in the browser until you find what you're looking for. So if I can't find COVID-19 allergy, I definitely have a COVID-19 vaccine. If I just do the vaccine entry, I see, well, I get a revaccination with different COVID-19 vaccine. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an allergy to the COVID-19 vaccine. So let me just broaden my search and not go so specific to begin with. And let me say allergy to vaccine, right? Allergy vaccine. And I see that I do come up with a specific term, allergy to vaccine. And I'd looked for COVID-19 allergy or COVID-19 vaccine. I didn't find anything that had both of those concepts together. But I do think this is one term that I can use, allergy to vaccine. Let me open it up on the right-hand side, right-click, open it up on the left to see all the LLTs under that particular PT. So when I see it, there's only one LLT under that PT, allergy to vaccine. So that's all I have to choose from. So let me do this. Let me minimize my browser for now, and let me look up my reference, read up on it a little bit, because this is a very dynamic and evolving condition, especially as you know, the pandemic and things around the pandemic. So let's minimize the browser for now. Okay. And let me look and read up on in my references about allergy to COVID-19. Okay. Here my reference, which is a very good reference, actually talks very much about how both vaccines consist of modified mRNA viral spikes. And then as I read along, I find out lipid nanoparticles serve as carriers and as stabilizers of the RNA. They are partially pegylated, and this means covalently bound to polyethylene glycol. And as I read further, I find out that this is the culprit. In principle, polyethylene glycol has been known to be associated with immunological hypersensitivity reactions. So this little bit of information is good for me to sort of keep in the back of my mind that in the vaccines, most often, you know, and this was done after reading several articles, but this is the most relevant article for our purposes today. I want to keep in my mind that polyethylene glycol is the culprit most often having to do with mRNA or the COVID-19 vaccines. So what I want to do now is go back to the browser. I want to go back to the browser with this newfound knowledge, and I want to see, is there anything regarding maybe some other user also saw this article or needed this in their particular coding and has submitted this term, polyethylene glycol. Okay. E-T-H-Y. Okay, so polyethylene glycol, now that I found out, oh, well, look at this. There is a term, polyethylene glycol allergy. Someone has requested that, and it's under PT polymers allergy. So it is within the allergies or allergic conditions hierarchy in SOC immune system disorders. So I see that, well, this is, and actually just for you, the audience, I'd like to let you know that this term is new. It was added in version 24.1. And because of the pandemic, someone had submitted this request. Now, for my verbatim string, it said, allergy to COVID-19 vaccine. I have this knowledge. I see there's this term. Okay, so let me minimize my browser and go to our poll ev. With all of this background knowledge and all of this, looking at the browser, I want to ask all of you, what would you pick? Of all these choices, A, B, C, D, E, F, what do you think would be the most appropriate LLT or LLTs for this particular verbatim string? Allergy to COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, so 100% of you say allergy to vaccine. Maybe one or two, a very few people are saying polyethylene glycol. Okay. Now, the correct answer, I should let you know, is allergy to vaccine. A majority of you are correct. But in addition, this allergy to vaccine doesn't convey the full meaning of what was reported in the verbatim. They did tell you that it was to COVID-19 vaccine. So for among the choices that I have listed here, you would split code and also code COVID-19 immunization in order to provide context to which vaccine he got. Okay, and for C, this was like a trick question. I gave you that extra knowledge about polyethylene glycol, but in our verbatim string, yes, we don't know specifically what component of the vaccine they were allergic to, so we can't assume it was the polyethylene glycol. Okay, so the correct answers would be COVID-19 immunization A and allergy to vaccine D. Okay, so let me just point to you in the next slide. Okay, here's in our MEDRA term selection points to consider document, we do provide an explanation of the various scenarios and instances when you would split into more than one MEDRA term, as in the previous example. And so it tells you when you split, and sometimes some scenarios, in order to fully capture all of the clinical information that's provided to you, it may become necessary to have more than one code, as you can see in this little snapshot. In the third example, they have two terms to fully capture the whole clinical scenario. Okay. So therefore, we have these two examples, and those two codes would be the most appropriate, although some organizations, depending on your coding guidelines, may not agree. Okay, so going to the next slide. They're a little sticky for some reason. Okay, so we're only capturing the information that is provided to us, although the culprit most often to a COVID-19 vaccine allergy is polyethylene glycol. We can't assume that in this instance or in this case, that was the reason. So we can't, assume and code polyethylene glycol allergy. And this was a very important instance where this, the scenario of the pandemic is ever evolving with new information, new research being done. So it's very important to use references for topic updates. You always use your browser for the most exact match. And of course, sometimes the answers we provide here today may somewhat differ based on your approach in your organization and based on your internal coding guidelines. So we're finished with that example. Any questions, Nicole?
Yes, so there are a couple of questions. One, actually, Samina, we'll go back to your first example, the menstrual pain example, the back pain around period example. There was a question being asked that menstrual pain is not correct. And I think the ambiguity can be around the phrase actually around the start of the period, because it doesn't necessarily state before the start. It says around, which could be after the start of the period. So that's why I think the question is coming in is menstrual pain not correct?
I think when you look in the browser, the LLT menstrual back pain is under the PT menstrual. I believe. Let's go to the browser just to illustrate that.
Okay.
Okay.
Go in the browser.
So if we go to the browser and we look at back pain, and again, this is let's code together, and we may not always 100% agree with one another. It goes back to the duck and the frog. Now I made it into a frog. The duck and the rabbit example. We see things differently. Sometimes our mind emphasizes one component more than what another person may. But let's go back to the back pain example. Okay, so when we look at back pain, since we have the information, this was about around the start of her period, right? Our example said she had back pain around the start of her period, so when they were about to begin. So here we chose premenstrual back pain. The LLT premenstrual back pain is exactly what is reported in our example, right, about the back pain. That LLT happens to roll under PT premenstrual pain. And if we open that premenstrual pain in the browser just to see all the various LLTs under that concept. So on the left-hand side, we can open up that PT. Premenstrual pain PT, or the unique medical concept, has under it subconcepts of various different LLTs, including premenstrual abdominal pain, premenstrual back pain, premenstrual breast pain, premenstrual cramps, premenstrual pain itself, the exact mirror image match of the PT, as well as premenstrual pelvic pain. So all of these different types of pains in different areas, the breast, the back, the abdomen, roll as subconcepts under the main PT premenstrual pain. So that's why we chose that particular LLT, because it is exact match to what's being reported, but it happens to fall as a subconcept under the main PT of premenstrual pain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, if you want to search also, because they were asking about menstrual pain without the premenstrual. So I think you answered the question. But
the reason we chose premenstrual because it's around the start. So you can interpret that as they already started and it's menstrual pain, or before she gets her actual period, premenstrual. So I interpret this as premenstrual. If we look at menstrual pain menstrual, it goes to PT dysmenorrhea. And if we open that up and see what other subconcept LLTs or what other LLTs we have under that, you have cramps menstrual, menses painful, menstrual cramp. It doesn't really, although you can have back pain during your period, that's absolutely correct. For purposes of our exercise today, I interpret this as around the start or the premenstrual period she had back pain. That's why I chose that particular term. Okay.
Okay, so there's some additional comments and around the second example, so the allergy to the COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay.
So one comment says, well, you are correct that PEG is a compound eliciting an immunologic response. How do we know that the subject was not allergic to some other component of the COVID vaccine, since there are multiple formulations of that vaccine? And it says, I would choose allergy to vaccine, which does not assume anything.
Very good. So the submitter of that question agrees with my choice or our choice today. We chose allergy to vaccine exactly to highlight and accentuate the point that we can't assume. That was sort of like a trick to the audience. That's why I focused on polyethylene glycol as I checked my reference. That was more for my future, coding knowledge about vaccine allergies. But as you can see, we had that knowledge, but we didn't pick that as the final choice. We agree with the submitter of the question that yes, we cannot assume that it was polyethylene. That's why that was not the answer in our answers. Very good. I'm glad that people are agreeing with our approach and not getting tricked into choosing that extra bit of information that we found in our reference. Okay.
Yeah, very good. And it's always good to receive some comments to see what people are thinking, because as you mentioned, we all do look at things differently, and some organizations might take a slightly different approach. And we're not saying that approach is wrong. We're just saying there are different approaches, and it's good for us as well as the audience to hear the many different approaches and then make a determination for what we believe it to be a final determination. So in our own right, for whatever organization we're working for. One last comment, and I would, it says we cannot choose two LLTs, and that's all it states. So I don't know if the person who left that comment would like to go into a little more detail around why you cannot choose two LLTs or why that was written.
Yeah, I think sometimes if I can preempt this, that is often a challenging scenario because yes, oftentimes some systems don't allow you to split. That's a common challenge that we see oftentimes even in the help desk when we suggest split coding or in our examples, in our change request answers. That's a challenge. Obviously, that's an understood challenge. And, different organizations have to compose internal coding guidelines around that. When in a case where a particular concept needs to be split, how will they approach this? Because our term selection, meta term selection, points to consider document oftentimes also offers this, as I showed in my prior slides, this option of split coding.
Yes, and it's system dependent as well as, what area you're in, clinical versus safety. There's a little more freedom in the post-marketing environment than there is in a clinical environment. So so choosing two LLTs can be tricky, and the way you go about it, as long as you document it and you have conventions around it, and you can send a query, to get the LLT split and things like that. I think it helps tremendously in keeping cohesiveness across the board. So
okay, so are we any more questions around those two examples?
I don't see any at this moment, so I think if nothing comes in, we can move on. I'll clear the browser for you.
Okay, thank you. So let's go on to our third example now. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. Again, COVID-19 is certainly on all of our minds. Therefore, most of the examples are about COVID-19. And I think this is the challenge, or concepts around this particular area are probably also being faced by our user community. So the third example today is for her COVID-19 vaccine. Her second dose was a different vaccine than her first dose. So just to let you know, the understanding that for someone to have fully received their COVID-19 vaccine, that basically means that they've been fully immunized, means they've had the series of 2 vaccines, with the first vaccine being spaced about 3 to 4 weeks from the second vaccine. So typically that's what, for the most part, that's what being immunized against COVID-19 means nowadays. Of course, this can be changed when the requirements change, and to be fully immunized means you've also received a booster, but we're not going to go into the technicalities of that for now. For our purposes today, having fully received the COVID-19 vaccine means you've gotten both in a series of 2 shots. So for this particular individual, her COVID-19 vaccine, her second dose was a different vaccine than her first dose vaccine. So that's what they're telling us. Now, my thought process is going to ask the same questions every time I get a verbatim string or a verbatim term. Is this clear enough for me to code? What exactly is being reported? So what it basically means is that whatever her first dose vaccine was, the second one was different, right? It wasn't the same in the series. And then, of course, what is the anatomical site, or what is the medra soc where I think this concept resides? And of course, I'm going to make sure that the most appropriate LLT is captured. And then, of course, the ever question, is this concept, does this have multiple elements in it? Will we need to split? Okay, so before we go on, I want to sort of read up on this a little bit. Because it's a dynamic, ever-evolving situation, I want to research a little bit about, so what is the feeling about regulatory bodies? What does the general global view, what is the general global view regarding being able to have a different vaccine? Okay. Okay, so here's my reference I found, which is from the WHO. And they sort of, I'm not going to read this verbatim, but basically the gist of this is that WHO is currently evaluating the emerging evidence on the use of heterologous priming schedules. So basically, I find a new word to sort of exactly capture the verbatim string that I saw in my previous example. A heterologous priming schedule. This means the second dose, in a heterologous priming schedule, the second dose uses a different vaccine product than the first dose. Okay, then they have another concept as well, a heterologous boosting. It means that your first initial series of vaccines was of one type, but the booster dose that you got is of a different type. Okay, so that's just for my knowledge for the future, or maybe perhaps I can apply it to this particular example. I know that out there, the WHO even mentions a heterologous schedule for priming as well as for boosting. Okay, so with that knowledge in mind, I'm going to go to the browser. Okay, and I'm just going to look out for interest. I'm going to look up that new word that I just learned. Okay, let's see what I have as matches for this. Well, there's nothing right now in version 24.1, but because I'm curious, I'm a very avid Medra user, and perhaps I, may need this, I'm going to go in my supplemental English view just to see, has anyone else perhaps submitted a change request for this? Heterologous. Now, in my supplemental English view, I see two terms with a green dotted box around it. This means this is a supplemental term. It's going to be available for coding use in the next version release of Medra, which is version 25.0. And lo and behold, you see that COVID-19 heterologous vaccination is a term that's coming up in the next version release. I may be able to use that in the future. But for now, I can't use it for my coding purposes, but it's good to know that the user community, someone has submitted that particular term. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my normal version release view. And since I don't have that term now to use, what can I use? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up, it has to do with something to do with a COVID-19 vaccine, right? So let me look up COVID-19 vaccine and see what options I have there. Okay, COVID-19. When I type in COVID-19 vaccine, what do I get? COVID-19 vaccination, revaccination. Oh, look at that, revaccination with different COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, so let me open up this PT just to see all the options I have of LLTs under that particular PT. I right-click on the left-hand side. I'm going to open up the PT, and here I have all these terms. COVID-19 immunization, COVID-19 vaccination, LLT revaccination with different COVID-19 vaccine. So that seems to be something that I can use for my purposes today. Okay, so let's go back, close the browser, and go back to our poll and see what our audience is going to pick. Okay. Okay, here's a QR code to quickly take you to the poll if you're not already logged in. Okay, so what would you pick? COVID-19 immunization, revaccination with different COVID-19 vaccine, wrong drug selected, wrong product administered, or off-label use. Okay, so the best LLT, which I would use to capture my verbatim string that I was presented with, which is for her COVID-19 vaccine, her second dose was a different vaccine than her first dose vaccine. And 95% of you have chosen the correct answer, which is choice B, revaccination with COVID-19 vaccine. Now, this is again, you may not also want to choose COVID-19 immunization. Depending on your internal coding guidelines, you wouldn't be wrong. You wouldn't also be wrong if you chose choice B alone, revaccination with different COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, now in addition, when we move on to the next slide, make sure keep in mind, you only capture information that is given to you. We can't assume anything. Do use your references, especially around this topic since it's ever evolving, and use the browser to see what you already have for your use, what you can use today. And of course, some scenarios, the coding choice will be different depending on what your internal conventions say. Now here's the final answers. Like I said, some of you may want to add COVID-19 immunization. Some of you may just want to do LLT revaccination with different COVID-19. And then some of you may also say off-label use, because right now it has not been established since various regions have different recommendations. For some of you, it may be off-label. For some of you, it may not be. And for others, you may not want to even go there and label that as off-label use. So again, your internal conventions will drive you onto what actual final coding choices you make. And then we also showed you that in the supplemental view, we have an upcoming term, COVID-19 heterologous vaccination, as coined by the WHO. Okay, so for that, I believe I would also like to just show you briefly before I pass it on to Nicole that there is guidance in the MEDRA term selection points to consider document, section 3.27, on when to most appropriately use the term off-label use. So this is good for your reference here, that we do address off-label use and the use of that particular term in our points to consider document. Now I'll hand it off to you, Nicole, for example 4.
Okay, before we go, thank you, Samina, but before we start with the next example, we did receive some questions and comments.
Okay.
So the first one was, do we have access to the supplemental review list when using the desktop browser?
I believe you have to download that. If you're on the desktop browser, you have to download it. It's not available because when you download your files into the desktop browser, it's as per that version release. The only way you can see the supplemental terms is if you use the web-based browser.
Okay. And then the next one was, I would use MEDRA supplemental to look at the hierarchy of upcoming LLT COVID-19 heterologous vaccination. So that is correct.
That's correct.
What you showed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we have a couple more coming in. So somebody is asking, could we use, I'm just going to put the slide back on so they can see your examples again, but somebody asked, could we use medication error?
I'm sorry, what could we use?
Asked, could we use medication error?
I would not use medication error personally because, this is a dynamic situation. Some regions do recommend, some physicians do say it's okay to get a different second vaccine. But again, this is driven by your internal coding conventions, whatever you as an organization decide, whether you view this as a medication error or just with a simple LLT, revaccination with different COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay, and then we have another comment coming in. You can also see supplemental terms via NVAT.
Yes, the MEDRA
user group meeting yesterday. If anybody attended,
right. The MEDRA version analysis tool is live. So yes, just like the web-based browser, you can see the most current, most updated supplemental terms. But whereas you can't see that in the desk-based browser because you download files that are not dynamic.
Yeah, okay. And at this time, those are the only questions and comments we received. However, I would like to pose a random off-the-cuff question to the audience about supplemental terms. I would like to know who is using them, if you're using them, and for what purpose. Maybe this will be something we can put a poll in the future, because if you want to comment in while you have a second here, or if you use them at all in your organization, just let us know. Or if you're using them, only at time of release, or you do something with the supplemental terms beforehand, it'd be nice to get an idea of that as well. So just a little off the cuff, a little bit different. Okay, let me see if I can advance the slides. And while you're all thinking on that, I will start my first coding example. So thanks, Samina, for walking us through those great examples. It was very interesting to walk with you through it and listen in and see the different ways that people may view a term, So now
Are you a rabbit person? Are you still a rabbit person or a duck person?
I'm still a duck.
Okay.
But let's see by the end. Maybe I'll switch to a rabbit. Don't forget my rocks too in the water. But all right, now we'll move on to our next example, number 4. So this example is a seemingly simple example of leukemia refractory. This actually has come up in a past life of mine for coding, and it was sometimes a term of debate. So I figured, we'll put it in and see what the audience has to say based off of the information I provide, and see if everyone agrees with it or how people handle it in a different way. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. But now, when I first received leukemia refractory, I asked myself the same type of questions that Samina asked herself. It's always a good idea to get a reported term, take a step back, and just ask yourself some questions about it in order to not miss anything, right? So the first question I ask is the verbatim clear enough to code? Then I ask, what is actually being reported? I always think about, if my organization I'm working for, do they have a coding convention in place relating to, say, refractory terms specifically? Are we an oncology company? Do we have something very detailed about it? Are we, say, an cardiac company where maybe refractory doesn't come into play as much, where we don't have a convention? But it's always best to take a peek at the conventions and see what's in place, and make sure you know and understand them thoroughly for whatever your organization has to offer, in addition to the measure terms point to consider document. So then I say, well, what is the most appropriate LLT? Will we need to split it, co-manifest it, or query it? We'll see. So now let's take a look at this term in a little bit more detail. So first thing, as I mentioned, is let's define refractory. So I always the first thing I do when I receive a reported verbatim term is, it's my personal preference, but I always try to define what is being reported to me. So since the reported term was leukemia recurrent, I went to the NCI, the National Cancer Institute website, and I checked for additional information. I provided the link on the website in case anybody, I should have actually put the website, but it's a clickable link. But you can Google National Cancer Institute and refractory cancer and leukemia, and it will pop up. So one important thing to note is always use a reputable website to search for information. Some organizations actually have conventions around that as well. What websites to use, well, back in the day, what books to use. So always check and make sure that you're using a site that's compatible with your organization wants you to use. So as we look into the definition of refractory, we see that it's a blood cancer, a cancer that doesn't respond to treatment. So in other words, it's resistant to treatment. So this resistance can happen at the beginning of the treatment, or it can develop over time. So meaning at first you're fine, and then as you're going along through your therapy, you develop a resistance to that therapy. So now that we defined and we kind of have an understanding of what refractory actually means in the context of this term, it's time to browse Medra. So give me a second. I'm going to pull over the browser. We're going to go in. And the first thing we'll do, I opted, Samina was using the web-based browser when she was browsing her terms, but I am now opting to use the desktop browser. So it's slightly different, and we already had the comment come through where we don't have access to the supplemental terms within, right, like easily as in the web-based browser. So it's everything else is the same from a search perspective. So when handling this leukemia refractory term, I would first opt to search a combination of, what I do is I use string words, so I don't type a full word. So I'll do leukemia, and then we can do something like this to see if anything's available. And when we search, you can see there are no exact hits. We can go down. We see that there's a leukemia recurrent, even a recurrent prophylaxis. Let's see if we see anything relating to refractory. We'll keep going down. And it does not look like there's anything, a term available with leukemia. Oops, I put recurrent. We have to do refract. So see, nothing came up. That's better. I put the wrong search string in. See, which can happen. You can get recurrent refractory, you know, but as long as you catch your mistake, and then you can, oh, here, and I did a spelling error too, see? Just showing that mistakes can happen. So we go through and we see if there's leukemia recurrent. And as we're looking, we could see all these terms available. And there are some refractory type terms available. Now, are they too specific for what we need? We'll go through and continue to do some more searching. So then we'll go back and look individually. We want to look at leukemia on a whole. We'll go through, and as you can see, now you'll get everything with leukemia. And for all of our European or British English spelling users, I did use the American English way, but you can also search via the British English way if you prefer. Terms will come up, but we'll look through and see if we see anything. So there's tons of terms that come up, so you have to take your time scrolling through. We do see we have a leukemia term here. Now, it doesn't necessarily have refractory added to it, but we do have a leukemia term that codes into the leukemia's HLGT and further into neoplasm SOC. Let's keep going, see if we have any refractory related to leukemia in this type of search. And again, nothing pops up. So the next thing I would do is a refractory search and see what comes up. I'll actually spell the whole word out and see if anything comes up here. So as we scroll through, again, we could see there are some detailed leukemia refractory type terms like lymphocytic, chronic lymphocytic. You can also keep going to see up here. Okay, keep going down. I'm going to go see. So we see refractory anemia. And here's a refractory cancer type term. Now that's one to keep in the back of your mind, you know, when going through this, because and again, you'll see that this codes into the neoplasm stock, but it's also important to see the HLGT here, which is miscellaneous and site unspecified, which means that this term is more of a general type term when coding. It's not as specific as, say, the leukemias, which has an HLGT or bucket in the leukemia SOC. Okay, so now that we browsed, we looked, we'll move on and we'll go to our poll. So I always pop this up just in case anybody got kicked out or you need a couple seconds to get in, get back in. Okay, so our poll is open for what would, now that we searched, what would you choose? LLT or LLTs? Oh, interesting. So a lot of people are going with the refractory cancer down at the bottom. Looks like C is coming in with half of those votes. So for leukemia recurrent, it looks like some people would just go to leukemia and others would go to adult T-cell lymphoma leukemia refractory. So nobody's going with choice D, which is interesting. I don't think we've seen that yet, where we have no responses to an answer. So let's move on. So now that we took the poll and we see what how everyone's leaning, let's break down the choices. So again, we had leukemia, adult T-cell lymphoma leukemia refractory, leukemia recurrent, acute leukemia in remission, and refractory cancer. So now, since we browsed and we saw that we don't seem to have the close, exact match of leukemia refractory, let's start to weed out some terms. So right from the beginning, I would say the adult T-cell lymphoma leukemia refractory, the acute leukemia in remission can be weeded out because they are very specific terms that our reported term of just leukemia refractory didn't necessarily reflect in it. So we also have, along with the acute leukemia, is the in remission, and our term does not state remission, it states refractory. And we, as you recall, we defined refractory. So another option was leukemia recurrent, and I saw that some people did choose that. And it's important to note that recurrent doesn't necessarily equal refractory. Whereas refractory is a resistance to treatment, recurrent is when it occurs again. So they're not necessarily identical in a sense of, when we're trying to define the term. So with this being said, it's always best to follow it leaves the other two, leukemia and refractory cancer, for possible answers to this question, to this reported term. So with that being said, it's always important to follow your internal conventions, as some companies may want to capture the leukemia as well as the refractory cancer, which is what we went through and what we saw in our responses. It's refractory, the refractory cancer itself, as I mentioned, is a more general term from an analysis perspective. So it may not provide much benefit, but there's still enough benefit that some companies, organizations may want to use it. So if when performing coding, you feel there isn't a comprehensive enough LLT to say capture this, as Samina mentioned during her examples, please feel free to utilize the change request tool that's offered by the MSSO. It's always a good way. You can submit a request and you'll get an answer back, whether it's accepted or denied, and a reason with why. So what did we learn while going through this example? So it's always best to first try to define what is being reported. Try to avoid inferring or adding information that was not provided in a term. So say remission or a chronic or acute into the term if it's not present when the term is reported. Always use the browser to search all possible LLT matches to understand what is available, and become familiar with your organization's internal conventions. We keep saying it over and over because it's extremely important to become familiar, along with, of course, the measure points to consider. And most organizations' internal conventions are based off of the MSSO measure points to consider document, as they should be. It's a good reference point, a good starting point. And again, another thing we learned is you can always submit a change request if your exact match term isn't available. So with all that being said, the final suggestions for leukemia refractory could be LLT leukemia to capture the leukemia aspect of the cancer, of the nature of the cancer that the patient is reporting, and LLT refractory cancer as a co-manifestation or a separate entity. Some organizations, like we said, would choose to code both and co-manifest, or query to have it split and code both. Again, it's a safety versus clinical issue, wherein safety, maybe source docs or a narrative can be referenced and additional information can be added on, and it could be co-manifested. And when I say co-manifest a term, depending on what system you use in safety or clinical, or if you share a system, some systems allow co-manifestation, which means you would code the leukemia and then you can add an additional slider underneath of the refractory cancer and have that coded in addition when you're doing it. So that would be, those are my final suggestions. And depending on your company's organizations, Conventions would be whether you choose just the leukemia, just the refractory cancer, or a combination of both. And how you go about it, again, depends on your system and your organization's conventions. So at this point, Samina, I would like to take a pause and see if there are any questions.
So far, there are no questions.
Okay. I do see we have some information on the supplemental, which we'll get to. I also do see we're running low on time here, so I think I'll go through one more example, and then we'll start to wrap it up so that we don't keep people past the time because we're already at 12:20. So no questions, right, Samina? I'll just check again.
Yeah, no questions around that particular example.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the next example. In the interest of time, I'm sorry, I went a little bit faster, but the next example is the patient missed taking medication due to COVID-19. So this, we ask ourselves similar questions. Again, is the verbatim clear enough to code? What exactly is being reported? What would be the most appropriate LLT? Is there two different things going on here? What do you need to consider? Does this need to be split? Do you see a due to there, which a lot of companies have conventions around and need to clarify further or split out? I'm going to start this a little bit different. We'll start with the poll first. I'll take a different approach. I would like to see where people stand right off the bat without giving any information at all. So if everyone would answer. Okay, so we see very strong on the missed dose, 94%. We have a couple people coding COVID-19. But nobody choosing the rest of my choices. So no quarantine, no extra dose, no insurance issue. Okay. So now we'll discuss this term. So here's what we do know. Here's what you may interpret, that the patient has COVID-19, right? And then here's what I may interpret from this term, that the patient is having anxiety around the pandemic and no longer wants to take the medication, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the due to COVID-19, because they have COVID-19, they may be having all kinds of stuff happening around COVID-19 where they can't, they're having anxiety and they stop taking it. And here's what somebody else might see. So the patient can't get their medication because of COVID-19. So say because they're quarantined or a drug supply issue, and they can't receive the information. So this goes back to when you think of this term and you first see it, right? Of course, the first thing with the pandemic comes to your mind, this patient has COVID-19, but it's important to take a step back, like we've been mentioning throughout the presentation, and kind of think about what are the other ways this can be interpreted. And as you can see, there are many different ways, and it goes back to, again, Samina, the duck versus the rabbit versus the rocks versus a frog you threw in. So it's important to always keep that in mind. It's also important to figure out, what do we know? So in this case, we do know that the patient missed taking the medication. So if in this instance, again, if a verbatim or reported term seems confusing or can be read multiple ways, at times it's best to break it down into what we do know. So it's also known that this is a due to term. And as I mentioned, always check what your organization's rules around these types of terms like due to, as there may be a convention in place that states to always split or query to have split the due to type terms. So right off the bat, if you are unsure that if your organization has a due to rule, check your conventions and see how they want you to handle it. And a good rule of thumb is to always base internal coding conventions off the measure points to consider, which I mentioned previously. It's a good starting point for all organizations' internal documentation. So now we are going to quickly browse because we are running out of time. We'll just do a quick browse here. First thing we'll pull up is the missed dose. So you can see there are a couple different options: a booster dose missed, missed dose in general, missed dose in error. Since we don't know if this was an error or not, again, with assuming we can just take care of missed dose. We can also add to see if there's anything around missing with COVID. See, nothing comes up as we would expect, but we can also, in missed, it's always good to search synonyms. So we can search skip to see if, and we see here, we just get skip beats, no skip dose. So a good rule of thumb when browsing, and I know I went through that fairly quickly and I apologize, but a good rule of thumb is to always exhaust all possible combinations of terms when checking the browser, including your synonyms. Okay, so what else do we know? So when dealing with a term that can be deemed ambiguous, after browsing and determining what we do know, it's always a good option to determine if a query is needed. So does the patient have COVID-19? Is this a drug supply issue? Is the patient homebound and can't get to the medication because of the COVID pandemic? These are some of the questions to ask. And if a question needs to be asked, it's always best to clarify that question. And again, if you work in the post-marketing side of things, you may be able to obtain additional information with the source docs or the narrative. So as we go through, we can now move on to the learning points. So terms, as we know, and as we've seen throughout this presentation, terms can be interpreted in many ways. It's always best to never infer or add information to a term based off interpretation. It's always best to query for clarification. Take advantage of the tools the MSSO offers and the MSSO provides, in this case, the browser, to search all the LLTs. And be sure to always check all, if you're working in post-marketing environment, be sure to always check all source docs and the narrative if you're working on that side of things, to make sure you have the full picture of what's being reported. And always, as always, mention it again, check your company's internal coding conventions, especially relating to due to terms. And in clinical, it's always important, as I mentioned, a query should always be issued, as you can't change any information. Okay, so now with that being said, I'm going to open another poll real quick. Did anybody's response change based off of what we talked through? Okay, so some people's responses did change. Okay, not many. I mean, most people kept the same, but some people's did change. So that's it's good to know as you talk through things. See, it might just be the way you interpret the term right off the bat, and how you would handle it. So, all right, good to know. Okay, Samina, so it's 12:27, and I don't want to keep everyone. I did have another example, and just to let the audience know, we will carry this example over into our next class, which will be held in 2022. We don't have time right now to go through. I don't want to get the answer to it. But, and Samina, are you okay if we skip your example 7? Or
Certainly. I think we can go. We still would like the users to stay logged into Poll Everywhere because we have 2 very important feedback questions for them.
Yes. So these 2, the last 2 examples we had, it's important to note we will carry them over to the next class, and we will also add any additional examples that you guys, that the audience may bring to us for the next class. But okay, Samina, if you want to.
Sure. Okay, so before you leave, we'd really like to get your feedback regarding your comfort level. As the user community, we base our decisions on face-to-face trainings. When would you be most willing to travel again for face-to-face MEDRA trainings? So please provide your feedback, whether number 1, whenever face-to-face training restarts, or you'd prefer virtual training for the foreseeable future, or you want to base your decision depending on how the global situation plays out, or like most of us, or at least me, I'm not sure, because so many things are up in the air, so many questions yet to be answered. So I can see that based on the current participation, about 70% prefer to keep it virtual training for the foreseeable future. A few of you are not sure, and some 16% of you will be willing to start whenever we restart face-to-face. Okay, I think most people who are going to answer have answered. So thank you very much. This is very important for us, so thank you very much for providing your feedback regarding this question. Now, the next slide is the slide that we mentioned earlier on in the presentation. This is your opportunity to present with us various coding questions, various coding verbatims that you'd like to see discussed in our future Let's Code Together sessions. So we'll pass on the notes that we get. So to the next poll question. It's basically a freehand.
Okay, and then also I'm going to go through while you guys are working on some responses for this poll question. I'm taking a look at the comments. So we did receive some comments on supplemental terms. So that's good. Some people use supplemental terms to guide their code's choice when a match is not easily identified. So that's good to know. Also for my example of the leukemia refractory, somebody wrote there are many different types of leukemia at the LLT level, which are refractory. So the best thing to do is query for the type of leukemia. If you can't query, then best choice is refractory cancer. So that's also good to get somebody's opinion on that. And then somebody wrote, we can't select multiple options in the poll for splitting terms. So Samina and I will take note of that, and we'll make sure that we have it open so people can choose more than one option in future classes. We want to make sure that, I thought it was on in the polling, but I guess if somebody's having an issue, we'll look into it and make sure it's on for next time. So
I see people are entering different examples or different coding verbatim strings they'd like to see in future classes. So I see people are continuing to put that in, and we can all see it.
Yes. Okay, and they're also giving feedback on the class, which is always nice. So,
okay. All right, and make sure when you present your examples that they're going to be of interest to the general audience and they're not too much focused on a particular specific therapeutic area, so that it's more applicable or of interest to the whole, audience.
Yeah, and Samina and I will make sense of this. We'll put we'll make sure we don't miss anything in this word pond when we're finished with the class. So we'll make sure we capture your suggestions. Yeah, and I think we'll give everybody a couple more seconds. Sorry, we're a little over. I know everybody's time is very valuable, so we'll get you out of here in a minute or two.
And I think our poll will save all of these examples for us to consider for future presentations.
Yes, that's correct. Yep. Okay, so I see we are getting lots of different suggestions for future classes, which is great. So we can build our slide deck off of that. And we already have 2 to start with next time that we didn't get a chance to go through today, which is also good. So, okay. At this time, I think we'll just, you could feel free to keep entering as long as it allows. We'll try to keep that poll open. And Samina, if you want to go.
Sure. Yeah, before we leave you for today, I'd just like to refer to some of these very important links. First of all, we have the Medra website link where you can access the MVAT tool that was mentioned today, the web change request tool, as well as access lots of our support documentation, the various points to consider documents that we have. The second email is the email for the Medra MSSO Help Desk. If you have any questions that aren't already answered in the frequently asked questions section, you can certainly feel free to ask us in the help desk. And the last 3 links are for the various Medra browsers that we have, the desktop browser, as well as the web-based browser, and of course, some of you like to use the mobile browser. So these are links for each of the 3 browser options that we have. Okay, the next slide we have the specific link for the self-service application. This is very helpful for you to, get your password in case you lost it, as well as to check your partner's subscription status. And if you're the primary point of contact in your organization, you can also use the self-service application to get your Medra password and the unzipped password for that particular version. Then, of course, very important here, I'd like to mention, always check the training schedule. We constantly update that with all upcoming classes and sessions. And for your interest, the next Let's Code Together session will be offered by our European colleagues on January 19th. So go ahead and register that for that if you haven't done already from this link on the training schedule. And then the other link that we have is the change request submission. This link takes you to a description of how our process flow looks like when we evaluate a particular change request for your better understanding. It also provides you a link to the WebCR tool over here. Then here's a specific link for the MEDRA support documentation. All of your points to consider documents, introductory guides, etc. are accessible through that. And of course, last but not least, you can find our recorded session today on our MSSO MEDRA YouTube channel. Give us about 2 to 3 days when it will be posted. And then when you go to the playlist, you can see our European colleagues as well. They have their own playlist, which you can search to see under the more information which topics, which verbatim strings were discussed in that particular session. So it's of interest to you. You can certainly check it out at your leisure. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your feedback. We appreciate your suggestions and hope to see you next time. So whether you're a duck person, a frog person, or a rabbit person, you're more than welcome to join us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And we know that time is of essence in the industry we're in and what we do. So we appreciate you taking the time out of your day, your busy day, to come and join us for this session. We hope to see you in a future session soon. And just as Samina mentioned, easy ways to reference. I know we gave you a lot of links. You could go to medra.org and search around and look for everything that was provided there. And also, if you Google MSSO MEDRA YouTube, it will come up and you can click on the link without actually having to use the link. So you can do an easy Google search, and there's lots of great presentations on there from Let's Go Together and beyond. So there's many other things offered that our wonderful trainers give on a regular basis. So it's worth checking it out. So again, thank you, and we hope to see you in a future class soon, and hopefully in person.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a great day.
Thank you, ladies. I'll close the session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.